Oh, you preach a really strong message of self-love. Let's see, baby.
What happens when a pop icon tries to launch herself into space? Literally and figuratively. But crash lands into public mockery, a failing relationship, and a career on the edge. Katy Perry thought she was making a comeback. Instead, she became the punchline. And while the world laughed at her zero-gravity stunts and offbeat performances, behind the glitter and stage lights, something much darker was unraveling. Because the truth is, when the cameras shut off, Katy wasn't just losing fans. She was losing Orlando Bloom, piece by piece. It was meant to be a moment of rebirth. Katy Perry, once pop royalty, was gearing up for a new era. One that was bold, unapologetic, and so over the top, it was literally aiming for the stars. In a surprise move, she partnered with Blue Origin for a symbolic space mission that blurred the lines between performance and spectacle. And then, everything backfired. Instead of applause, Katy found herself in the middle of an internet storm. The clips from her space-themed tour performances didn't inspire wonder. They inspired memes. Viral captions called it a pop star having an existential crisis at zero gravity. Audiences mocked her robotic dance moves, her futuristic set design, even her outfit choices. "She looks like she's malfunctioning on Mars," one user wrote. NASA called. They want their budget back. The internet can be brutal, but this was different. The tone wasn't just sarcastic, it was scathing. And behind every tweet, every comment, and every harsh headline, Katy was quietly crumbling. She later opened up in an interview saying, "You shouldn't read the good or the bad, but I did, and it hurt." The pressure to deliver the comeback of the decade had become unbearable. But the damage wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. This wasn't just about a bad tour review. This was about identity, legacy, relevance. Because for Katy, this tour wasn't just a job. It was her shot at redemption after years of public setbacks, from her fallout with American Idol to the lukewarm response to her last album. But instead of rising from the ashes, she found herself spiraling, further and further away from the version of herself she was trying to resurrect. And as her public image took a beating, something else began to fracture behind the scenes. Her relationship with Orlando Bloom, already fragile, was starting to crack. If the space stunt was Katy's spark, the tour was the wildfire she couldn't put out. From the moment her comeback tour launched, it was obvious something was off. Sloppy choreography, awkward staging, vocals that didn't land. What should have been her grand return felt more like a slow-motion meltdown. And the internet noticed. Fast. Clips of her attempting zero-gravity moonwalks turned into running jokes. One video of her stiffly pole dancing in a silver catsuit was captioned, "Zero gravity, zero talent. Someone beam her back up." It wasn't just online trolls piling on. Critics described the tour as chaotic, tone-deaf, and out of touch. And Katy? She felt every blow. Behind the scenes, she wasn't just embarrassed. She was crushed. Insiders say she obsessed over reviews, read every tweet, and questioned whether she even belonged on stage anymore. She's frustrated, she's disappointed, and she's exhausted, a source revealed. It didn't help that the album tied to the tour, produced in part by Dr. Luke, a controversial figure long criticized for his treatment of women, sparked backlash too. Fans questioned how she could speak about divine feminine energy and empowerment while working with someone who's become a symbol of the opposite. The contradictions became too loud to ignore. And for Katy, it was personal. This wasn't just her art, it was her identity, her comeback, her second chance. In an interview, she confessed, "This album came from a deep shift. Motherhood changed me. I was trying to reconnect with my higher self." But as sales underperformed and critics tore her apart, that higher self was sinking fast. And while Katy spiraled in public, the pressure leaked into her private life. Because when your world is falling apart, who do you lean on? That's when Orlando started to pull away. While Katy was battling critics and clinging to a collapsing tour, Orlando Bloom, her longtime fiancé, was quietly stepping back. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with harsh words, just silence, distance, absence. Insiders say it didn't happen all at once. At first, he was her biggest cheerleader, defending her space tour, calming her during meltdowns, even traveling alongside her. But as the backlash grew louder and Katy's frustration turned inward, Orlando faded out. He stopped showing up to events. He skipped major tour stops. And then he was spotted alone, miles away in Miami, while Katy was still on the road. To the outside world, it looked like a man just taking some time to himself. But sources close to the couple painted a different picture. He's emotionally checked out. They're just waiting until the tour's over to make it official. 6 years engaged, 1 child, 0 wedding date. It wasn't just a rough patch. It was a slow-motion unraveling. And fans were catching on. They noticed the absence, the lack of photos, the stiffness in interviews. And then came the whispers. Did Orlando give Katy the same engagement ring he gave his ex? Why hasn't he said anything about the album, the tour, the chaos? But the clearest sign came not in words, but in where he wasn't. At the deep cover film premiere, a huge moment in Orlando's career, Katy Perry was nowhere to be seen. Not even a mention. Just a subtle smile, a red carpet walk, and a dog, his emotional support animal, tucked under his arm. And when he joked about being very emotional right now, the crowd laughed. But fans online weren't laughing, they were connecting the dots. This wasn't a couple working through things. This was one quietly walking away. This wasn't their first crash landing. Katy and Orlando had already fallen apart once, long before the tour, the memes, or even the engagement. Back in 2017, the couple quietly split after just over a year of dating. At the time, it was framed as mutual, respectful, no hard feelings. But behind that PR gloss was a storm brewing from the very start. Katy later opened up about it, saying, "We weren't really in it from day one. He had just finished a long period of celibacy, and I had just come out of another relationship." She was emotionally raw. He was spiritually searching, and neither one of them was ready. Still, even after the breakup, something kept pulling them back. Katy admitted that during one of her lowest points, she reached out to Orlando. She was doing a show near where he was vacationing and simply said, "Pop over." It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't planned, but she needed him and he showed up. "I was in a bad state, and for as strong as I try to be, I do have needs," she confessed, holding back tears in a later interview. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from someone known for being larger than life, and it changed everything. From there, they began to rebuild, slowly. They weren't just dating, they were healing, together. Couples therapy became part of the process. Arguments were frequent but short-lived, Katy said. "We fight hot and fast, but then we cool down. It's like LA weather," she joked. But beneath the humor was a simple truth. This wasn't easy. It never had been. Even Orlando admitted, "We're in 2 different pools. Her world doesn't make sense to me, and mine doesn't make sense to her." But despite the chaos, they got engaged in 2019. A 6-year engagement. No wedding, no ceremony. Just a constant juggling act between their careers, egos, and emotions. And now, with another storm brewing, the question was whether they'd be able to catch each other again, or if this time they'd fall for good. Before the space mission, before the failed tour, before the silence, Katy and Orlando had already broken each other once. It was 2017 when they first called it quits. No dramatic breakup post, no messy public fallout, just a vague joint statement about taking respectful, loving space. But if you looked a little closer, the cracks were already showing long before the split. They weren't aligned. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not even logistically. Katy would later confess in a Call Her Daddy interview, "We weren't really in it from the beginning. He had just done this huge stretch of celibacy and had all these intentions, and I was like, fresh out of something else. She wasn't ready. He was searching for clarity. and neither one of them knew how to meet the other where they truly were. Still, when they split, it wasn't clean. There were blurred lines, late-night texts, and lingering feelings. They talked. Sometimes. Fell quiet. Sometimes. But the connection never fully snapped. And then one night, Katy was performing a show near where Orlando happened to be vacationing. She messaged him casually, almost shyly. "Pop over?" It wasn't meant to be dramatic, but in that moment, she needed someone. "I was in a bad state," she admitted. "I needed his energy, his calm, his anchor." He showed up, and in that quiet, unplanned moment, away from cameras, stages, and rehearsed lines, something cracked open. Katy, who had always been the one to carry herself like a firework, loud, explosive, untouchable, finally admitted, "As strong as I pretend to be, I do need help. I do have needs." It was raw, and it was real, and for a while, it was enough. The two began to rebuild, brick by emotional brick. They didn't rush it. They went to couples therapy. They argued, frequently. But according to Katy, they had a rhythm. "We argue hot and fast, but we cool down just as quickly, like LA weather." They tried to laugh through the conflict, but deep down, they both knew. Love alone wasn't going to make this easy. Even Orlando admitted bluntly in an interview, "We're in two completely different pools. Her work life, I don't understand it. Mine, she doesn't get it either." But despite the differences, the therapy, the emotional labor, they made it work. At least for a time. On Valentine's Day 2019, he proposed. A romantic gesture, a stunning ring, a moment fans called a fairy tale. But years passed, and the fairy tale stayed frozen. No wedding date, no planning. Just a 6-year engagement hanging like a question mark. And while they celebrated milestones, like the birth of their daughter Daisy in 2020, fans began to notice. Something about their dynamic always felt unfinished. As if they were always trying to glue the pieces back together while pretending it had never broken. And now, in 2025, as career setbacks, tour disasters, and internet mockery mount on Katy's shoulders, the weight of their unresolved history is pressing down harder than ever. Can love survive when it's already been rebuilt once, on a shaky foundation? For a while, it looked like Katy and Orlando had found their rhythm. They had a daughter, a fresh engagement, and matching red carpet smiles. But behind closed doors, they weren't sinking. They were surviving. Therapy had become a staple in their relationship. And while that might sound like a good thing, it wasn't born from stability. It was a lifeline. A way to manage constant emotional static neither of them could silence. Katy tried to downplay it in interviews, painting their sessions as growth moments. "We argue fast, then cool off quickly. That's just how we are," she said. But Orlando wasn't as polished. He admitted something that left fans unsettled. "We're in two different pools. Her world doesn't make sense to me. Mine doesn't make sense to her." That wasn't just miscommunication. That was emotional disconnection. He went on, "Sometimes things are really, really, really challenging. Not once, not twice, but 3 reallys. No sugarcoating, no pretending, just raw frustration." And suddenly, the cracks that fans had ignored started to shine under a new light. The long engagement, the misdraped carpets, the fact that he once gifted Katy a ring nearly identical to the one he gave his ex. Then there was Katy's emotional state. She was open about her breakdowns, her doubts, her need for support. But Orlando? He was growing quieter, more distant. At one point, he even joked about needing an emotional support animal while holding his dog, Biggie Smalls, on The Tonight Show. "He goes with me everywhere. I'm very emotional right now." It got laughs from the audience, but fans online weren't laughing. They were asking, why is he emotional? Where's Katy? Is he already checked out? Their love story, once framed as a healing reunion, now looked more like two people trying to force alignment between two totally different lives. And when asked in interviews about their future, they didn't talk about wedding dates. They talked about therapy, challenges, trying. It stopped sounding like love and started sounding like work. In 2019, Orlando Bloom proposed to Katy Perry in what was supposed to be a magical, once-in-a-lifetime moment. Red roses, champagne, helicopter ride, the kind of thing tabloids call storybook. And yet, years later, that story still has no ending. No wedding date, no save the dates, not even a whisper of wedding plans. For a while, fans assumed they were just busy. Celebrity schedules, new baby, the pandemic. But as months turned into years, the silence became deafening. And then came the questions. Why hasn't Katy posted about a wedding dress fitting? Why hasn't Orlando mentioned a venue, a date, anything? Then came the rumors about the ring. Fans noticed something odd. The ring Katy proudly showed off in engagement photos looked eerily similar to the one Orlando had given his ex-fiancée, Miranda Kerr. Same vintage floral design, nearly identical setting. It didn't take long for the internet to explode. Did he just recycle a ring? If someone gave me the same ring they gave their ex, I'd walk. That's not romantic, it's lazy. It might have seemed like a small thing, but to many, it was a symbol of a bigger problem. This relationship wasn't moving forward. The engagement, once a promise, had become a pause button, a placeholder for a wedding that wasn't coming. Some speculated that they never planned to marry at all. Maybe the engagement was just damage control, one comment read. They had a baby, the media was watching. What better way to signal stability? Others pointed out how Orlando's public tone had shifted. He'd gone from doting and supportive to distant and dry. Katy, meanwhile, seemed to be spiraling under the weight of public criticism and career failure, while still clinging to a version of this relationship that maybe no longer existed. And then there was the fan moment that sent eyebrows skyrocketing. During one of her recent shows, Katy jokingly called out a fan in the crowd for DMing her man. "If you keep messaging him, I'll have you removed," she said with a nervous laugh. Some chuckled, others cringed, because it didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like a warning, like someone who felt her grip slipping and was trying to hold on with humor. In the whirlwind of public scrutiny, awkward interviews, and quiet exits, one name is often mentioned, but rarely centered: Daisy. Katy and Orlando's daughter was born into a world of flashing cameras, tour buses, and private jets. But even with all the privilege, one thing money can't buy is stability. And lately, things have felt anything but stable. While Katy hits the road for her tour, trying to salvage an album critics have already dismissed, sources say Daisy is by her side, traveling from city to city, sightseeing, sleeping in hotels, watching her mom put on a brave face for the world. It might look glamorous, but behind the scenes, insiders claim it's been emotionally draining. Katy's juggling press, performances, parenting, and the looming implosion of her personal life. She's trying to do it all, one source said, but she's clearly overwhelmed. And then there's Orlando, largely absent. While Katy takes Daisy on tour, Orlando's been spotted in Florida, away from the chaos, spending more and more time alone. Some say he's trying to find space to think. Others believe he's simply moved on. But the distance is hard to ignore. They no longer seem like a family unit, more like two people sharing custody on separate continents. There are no recent photos of all three together, no joint interviews, just separate lives, intersecting only when necessary. And while both have praised their parenting dynamic in the past, recent behavior paints a more fractured picture. Katy has hinted at emotional exhaustion. Orlando has grown increasingly silent. Even during public appearances, there's a subtle shift in how they reference Daisy, if they do at all. Not as our daughter, not as we, just Daisy. Fans have noticed. Where's Orlando in all of this? Is Daisy just traveling with Katy while he lives his own life? That poor kid's going to grow up with two parents in different worlds. And in many ways, she already is. Because while Katy's fighting to prove she's still relevant and Orlando's slipping further into the background, Daisy is growing up in the middle of a storm she didn't ask for. Katy Perry stood on stage in Sydney, Thousands of fans screaming her name, cameras flashing, lights pulsing. She was just about to perform a song, I'm Still Breathing, when she paused. Then she said it. "This song is about a breakup, and this Tim Tam saved me." She smiled. But behind the joke was something raw, real. A silent confirmation of what so many had suspected for months. Later that night, Orlando Bloom was photographed alone at the deep cover film premiere. No Katy, no mention of her, no ring. If they weren't officially over, they were definitely living separate lives. And yet, neither of them has addressed the breakup directly. No statement, no post. Just long silences, vague interviews, and a growing list of signs pointing toward an ending that's already happened. One source said it plainly. They've grown apart. Everyone around them knows. They're just keeping it quiet. For now. But fans aren't fooled. From the spaceflight spectacle to the therapy confessions, from recycled rings to emotionally charged performances, this wasn't just a love story unraveling. It was a public breakdown wrapped in glitter and denial. And now, what's left? Katy, on tour, smiling through pain. Orlando retreating into silence, redefining himself. And Daisy, caught between two worlds. 6 years of engagement, no wedding, no closure. And yet, somehow, the story feels finished. Katy once said of their connection, "We are fire, fire, fire." But maybe they burned too hot, too fast, and now there's only smoke.